All right, hello everybody. My name is Alan, and it's that time again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a VCLT package that I got from Marty Worm. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but y'all know who I'm talking about. Marty is a longtime fixture in the heavy metal underground. He wrote for Metal Maniacs during their heyday in the late 90s, early 2000s. He worked with Wormgear Zine, that was his brainchild. He's the man behind Bindrune Recordings, a great label here in the United States. And of course, he runs the Marty Worm channel on YouTube as well. And Marty, of course, is a longtime heavy metal veteran and widely recognized as just a very nice and very great guy. So he sent me a big old box of CDs out of the blue, completely unsolicited. And so thank you. I appreciate it very much, Marty. It's been a lot of fun digging through this stuff and seeing what there is. So what I'm going to do tonight is just go through the CDs kind of quickly and offer up some thoughts on each one. I've played everything in the stack. It's taken a while to get through. And so I'll just want to show the stuff Marty sent and give some comments. Some of it I liked quite a bit. Some of it not very much. So there's several different styles of metal, lots of different eras, and some of it clicked, some of it didn't. But we'll go through all of them one at a time, and I'll probably try and move relatively quickly since it's a pretty big stack to get through. I have these roughly alphabetically, so that's the pattern that we'll follow. This one isn't in the alphabet, it starts with a number. It's the first album by 220 Volt. 220 Volt was a first wave of Swedish heavy metal band. They made a rare 7-inch single that's pretty good, and they went on to release several albums. Excuse me. They pretty quickly got a pretty mainstream melodic sound to them. Similar to a lot of Swedish bands. By the time they were getting into the mid 80s, they were all really looking to sort of copycat the sound and success of Europe. And their sound quickly, became very commercial. But the first single is a nice heavy slab of real metal. And this album I was pleasantly surprised with. I'd never heard the whole album. I kind of shied away from their stuff because I knew by reputation, they got pretty soft pretty quickly in their career. But this one still has a pretty good metallic ring to it. It's not a raging headbanger or anything like that, but it's got a good dose of melody. But it still is very representative of the better side of first wave of Swedish heavy metal bands. In fact, one of the songs from the single is on here in a reworked version. I got to double check which side it is. The Prisoner of War song got a redo on this. So they were still playing some of that stuff from even back in their single and demo days. So yeah, it was really cool to hear this. Never had gotten around to it. And yeah, this one's a win for sure. So we're off to a good start here. All right, next one up. This was the only one out of the box that I was familiar with, had heard. I didn't have a physical copy of it. I purchased it via download years ago. It is the first album by Finland's Cardinals Folly. And the title is Such Power is Dangerous! Exclamation point to make the point. And if you're not familiar with Cardinals Folly, they're a doom metal band. The name kind of gives it away that they're following that naming convention of Saint Vitus, Lord Vicar, Reverend Bazaar, Cardinals Folly. Doom metal bands seem to like that little convention of picking a religious figure's title and sticking another word after it. Okay, but Cardinals Folly. Best way to describe these is to me, they are a slightly more interesting version of Reverend Bazaar. They're definitely taking influences from Reverend Bazaar's sound. Again, this is their first album. They've done a few by now. This one came out about 10 years ago, around 2011. They had an EP before this that I really liked. Thought was pretty promising. The self-titled album is certainly not bad. I thought it was a step down from the EP. Main thing here is they're drawing on the Reverend Bazaar sound. You might think if you like one band, you like the other, but frankly, I like these guys a little better. I always had a little trouble with Reverend Bazaar. They were very popular. They brought a lot of focus back to doom metal. That's all great. My issues with Reverend Bazaar were, one, a lot of their songs ran on way, way longer than they needed to. It's not unusual for heavy metal bands to do very long songs, 10 to 20-minute range. That happens. That's okay. But the song needs to go somewhere or do something if you're going to have it go through that long. And I always felt like with Reverend Bizarre that the songs were just long for the sake of being long. And they were just slow, but they didn't move very well. The other thing that always bothered me with Reverend Bizarre was they were a little too tongue-in-cheek for me in their sort of, overt, oh, we're so doomy and, oh, Satan stuff. But it's always with like a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We're not serious. We're just goofing around. And that's okay, but if there's one style of metal where I don't like bands to goof around very much, it's doom metal. Because doom is very much about atmosphere and you're having sort of, a certain aura or vibe to your music. And when you intentionally start injecting a little too much cheese into that, it really counteracts what's supposed to be going on. It's hard to feel that sort of doomy presence when the guys are kind of like, we said Satan again. It just never quite worked for me very well. The one exception was their second album, Crush the Insects. That one where they shortened the song lengths, especially on side A. It worked a lot better. But, whenever they start doing those really long songs, it didn't work for me. Getting back to Cardinals Folly, they're going for that same kind of sound and style. The Cardinals Folly tracks, they're usually keeping them around the 10-minute mark. So not dragging out as long as Reverend Bizarre was prone to do, but maybe still a little too long for their own good. I feel like a lot of these songs, if they trimmed them down to the 6-7-minute mark, would be a bit stronger and definitely more memorable. It's a decent album. It's worth checking out if you like that style of doom for sure. But yeah, I felt it was a step in the right direction away from, being a complete clone of Reverend Bizarre, but still, could probably tinker with their sound. I've heard a few songs from their later ones, and they're certainly not bad, but I've never checked out any of the follow-up albums. So if you like Reverend Bizarre, that style of doom metal, give Cardinals Folly a listen. All right, next on the stack, we've got a band called Dark Nightmare, and this is an album called The Human Legacy? The Human Liberty. Sort of a strange title. Cover art leaves a little to be desired here. What we've got here is a Greek sort of traditional heavy metal band. I believe this one came out in 2009, and it's on one of the Greek labels, which I'm a little bad to get mixed up. This one's on Eat Metal Records. This one is very by the numbers, sort of traditional style heavy metal. It's not a bad album, but nothing about it stands out to me whatsoever either. And this is a pattern I see with a lot of the traditional style metal bands from Greece. No one is ever going to dispute that Greek has, a very large and very dedicated heavy metal fan base. Their fan base is, world famous for how into heavy metal they are and how passionate they are about it, which is great. That's fine. No issues there at all. I've always found most of the Greek bands I've listened to, particularly in this style of metal, they can play the style competently, but they never quite give it that extra little spark that makes it really stand out or catch. That most of the time I listen to it, it's like, yep, that's a heavy metal album. Okay. There's nothing that makes me come back and want to listen to these again. And it's just interesting because, the fans and the musicians from that country, they know their heavy metal history so well. They're so into the bands. They're competent musicians. That's not the problem. It's just that the songs feel very, very generic. And maybe that is coming across harsher than I mean for it to. Maybe it's just the fact that I've been listening to this stuff for, over 3 decades, and it's hard to make a big impression on me anymore. But a lot of the Greek bands, I just feel like, you're trying so hard to sound like your influences that you don't establish your own sound, that you need something to make yourself stand out. And again, there are definitely exceptions to this. Crosswind is the one that always pops to mind when I think of like best Greek bands. Some of Crosswind's demo stuff is amazing power metal style. They do a really good job with it. For a lot of the other Greek bands, I feel like they always needed to inject something of their own identity into the music. So again, it's an okay album, but probably not something I'm going to go back and listen to again. All right, next on the stack is some hard rock stuff. We've got a Deep Purple album called Abandon. If you've never heard of this one, don't feel bad. I hadn't either. Turns out it is their 16th studio album from 1998. One thing that was notable about this, when I looked some stuff up on it, it was the last album they did with John Lord, of course, longtime, founding member on the keyboards, famous for his Hammond organ sound on a lot of their classic material. According, this is 1998. This is long after, these sort of classic, early Mark versions of Deep Purple. It still has, a lot of the older members present, though, with Glover and, Ian on vocals and stuff. I listened to it. We're just going to put that right over there and move right along, because there's not much I can say about that one. It didn't really do anything at all for me. Next up, another Deep Purple album. This one's from a few years later in 2005. It's called Rapture of the Deep. So there's an album in between. So the last one was studio album 16 for Deep Purple. This is studio album 18 for Deep Purple. This one I liked a bit better. Again, there'd been some lineup changes by this point. Again, a lot of it is pretty straightforward, hard rock music. These bands that have been going for so long like this, let's be honest, by the time they're deep into their career, most of the stuff they're writing is just not going to stand up to their classic material. There were a couple of tunes I liked on this one. Wrong Man has a really nice riff to it and a really good vocal hook in the chorus, so that was a good track. There's at least one other. Clearly Quite Absurd was kind of a slower, quieter song, but I thought was really well done. So this one had a couple of cool tunes on it. Yeah, the Abandon album, the only track I liked on that one was the very last track is Bloodsucker, which is actually a reworking of a song from back in the Ritchie Blackmore era. So even the one good song from this one isn't really from this era of the band. But yeah, this one had a couple of tunes that were worth giving a listen to. All right, moving on through the stack. Next, we have, this one was really interesting to me. It's a band called Faith and Fire, which I'd never heard of before. And that's a little bit bad on me, because when you read the great big sticker on the front cover, Faith and Fire features Tony Moore, the vocalist from Riot during the Thundersteel era, which I adore. Made a video on that recently. Also Mike Flint's longtime contributor to Riot. And then it's also got Danny Miranda from Blue Oyster Cult and John Maselli from Rainbow on here. So it's something of a kind of super group put together. They made this one album. It's on Metal Heaven Records from 2006. So right away, it's like, whoa, that's a heck of a lineup. I had no idea that Tony Moore and Mike Flint's had done a little side project album here. It kind of makes sense. This would have fallen in that gap between the last of the DeMeo era Riot albums and the Immortal Soul album, where Tony came back and did vocals. Musically, I gotta say, this was a little disappointing once I listened to it. It's not bad. It had a couple of very good songs. The good songs on here are the slower ones, where they're a little more emotive. Tony can let his vocal range work a little better. Some of the songs have some pretty good heavy parts. The opener, Ready, has pretty very heavy opening. I was like, ooh, this could be good. But then the song didn't quite come together once the verses started kicking in. It reminds me a lot of the weaker tracks from Immortal Soul. If you're familiar with that Riot album, you'll know that some of the songs feel like they were a little incomplete. Didn't really weren't as tight as you expect Riot songs to be. And that's what a lot of this Faith and Fire material sounds like. I don't think any of these songs were like taken and reworked by Riot or anything. Maybe there's a riff or an idea here or there that I missed. But yeah, it really interesting to hear this, and I'll definitely keep this on the shelf, with all the rest of the Riot stuff. But yeah, musically, it's not quite as good as I had hoped once I realized who was in the band. All right, let's keep going. We got a ways to go here. We're not even halfway through this stack yet. If anyone's keeping count, I think there's 18 CDs total that we've got to take a quick look at here. This one is the solo album by Steve Grimmett. I had no idea Steve Grimmett had done a solo album, but he did in 2007. It's got a funny title to it. Little tiny things. Personal Crisis. Steve Grimmett, of course, best known for his vocals in Grim Reaper, but he also contributed vocals to the first Chateau album back in the new wave of British heavy metal, and also to the third Onslaught record, In Search of Sanity. Got a very distinctive voice. Unfortunately, for a stretch, he became, known as one of, the sort of the butt of one of the jokes on an old Beavis and Butthead episode where they kind of rip on a old Grim Reaper video pretty badly, where Steve's in this bad orange 80s jumpsuit. So they had some fun with that. Anyway, as far as this album goes, it's not a bad album. To me, it's very typical of solo project albums. I feel like a lot of times when a band member wanders off and does their own album, the songs are okay. They're not necessarily bad albums, but they do often feel like sort of a disconnected set of songs, with musicians for hire. There's nothing wrong with the, musicians on here. I don't remember the full lineup. I remember a couple of them had played in other, projects and stuff. But these albums often don't have anything that really binds them together very much. And as such, you listen to them a couple of times, like, yeah, it's not bad, but it's not something that you go back and listen to a whole lot. I feel this one definitely kind of falls into that pattern. So it's an okay listen if you're a big Steve Grimmett fan and you missed this one. Hey, give it a listen. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not something that's probably going to blow you away either. All right, up next we have an odd one, kind of a more proggy outing here. A band called Heart of Cygnus, clearly a Rush reference there. The album title is Tales from Outer Space. This one came out in 2009. I'd never heard of this band. The song titles, the layout, and the digipack, all gives away that they're going for, an outer space kind of, science fiction, science fantasy vibe here. You've got song titles like Starship Troopers, The Last Man, referencing probably the Omega Man from Twilight Zone, Awaken Sleeper from Dune, lots of things like that. I think there's another Rush reference on one of these somewhere. The album, it's kind of funny. They're definitely going for sort of a progressive metal sound, but it also sounds pretty simple and stripped down. It's not a lot of overly complicated musicianship or song structures or anything going on here. They're going for, relatively lightweight, kind of airy sound to it. It's another one that I would describe as, it's not bad, but there's nothing here that like really grabs you and is like, oh wow, I've got to go back and play that repeatedly. I did play this one a few times just to make sure I wasn't missing something. It's like, no, it's kind of just a very simple, straightforward sound, which is interesting because usually with bands that are going in a progressive direction, things start to get more intricate very quickly, and it didn't on this particular album. So it's an interesting one to check out. Didn't know a thing about them. It doesn't look like they did anything else after this. All right. Up next, one of the other bands I'd heard some stuff by, but I had never heard this particular one, is Jagdpanzer album. This one's from 2011. It was the last one they did before taking a few years off. It's called Scourge of the Light. I've done videos on Jagdpanzer before. I think my obsession with Ample Destruction is fairly well documented at that point. When Jagdpanzer got the band back together in sort of late 90s and moving into the 2000s, I checked out several of the albums. The pattern I noticed very quickly, though, was the albums were always competent, they were solid, but they didn't hold up to repeat listen very well. They kind of became consistent, but it was just they sort of, well, it's the 3-star consistent, but there was never that 4-star stuff that really made you want to come back and like, oh yeah, that's the song, and that's the one that's going to get stuck in my head, and that's the one I want to play over and over. So I was like, well, that's a very solid album. That's, from Jagdpanzer, you're kind of maybe expecting something a little more. Maybe I'm biased that way. And again, with so many things that come out every year and so many bands to check out, if a band seems like they're merely good, sort of, right there, okay, that's not necessarily something you're going to keep up with. So yeah, I fell way behind on listening to Jagdpanzer albums because I just wasn't hearing anything that made me want to hear the next Jagdpanzer album. This one on first impression, though, is really good. I thought this was much stronger than the couple that came before it. Now, it's been a long time since I heard those. Maybe I'd have a better impression of them at this point than I did in the past. But yeah, Scourge of the Light, it sounded, very lively, good energy to it. This is one I definitely will be going back and playing a good amount more because this made a strong impression. I'm glad to hear it because the band, has soldiered on. I'm glad they got back together and that they've had a good run of things. I was just kind of waiting for them to make that album. The Age of Mastery, the first one they did when they came back together, was the only one I thought was really highly above average. And after that, they kind of felt like they kind of got stuck in a rut a little bit. But it feels like with this one, they had definitely gotten out of that. So I'll be looking back into those Jagdpanzer albums soon. All right, up next, we go back into hard rock territory for an album from Kansas called Power. This is their 10th album from 1986. I knew nothing about this one. Kansas was one of those bands, I know the hits, and I don't really know anything else. So the deal with this album was it was something of a comeback. Steve Walsh, the sort of iconic vocalist for the band, had left in 1981. The band was kind of starting to split a bit in the early 80s. A couple of the members had become sort of born-again Christians, and they were really wanting to go more and more in a Christian direction. It sounds like after Steve Walsh left, they next couple of Kansas albums lean kind of strongly in a Christian direction. But then those members left to pursue full-on Christian music, and the other members kind of got Walsh back in the band, recruited some new blood, and put out this album called Power. It's a good listen. I liked this one a lot. I actually, you never know with this kind of thing. It's like, it's a Kansas album. We'll throw it on, listen to it. It's like, yeah, I actually listened to this one several times before moving on to the next one. It was apparently the last album that was kind of a success for them. It was the last album to chart, and it had their last big hit with All I Wanted. They never had another song really break into like the top 40 after this point in their career. Steve Walsh still sounds really good on this. He's a very good vocalist. He's got a very, clean, very distinct voice. You can pick him out instantly when you hear him usually. But yeah, I thought several of the songs on this were good. It's not outstanding, but it's a very solid sort of, mid 80s hard rock sound. And I have a feeling, this will slip back into, it's not something I want to put on repeat for, days at a time. But yeah, when I'm in the mood for this, this could easily be something I'll pull back off the shelf and give another spin. So decent little Kansas album. All right. Now, something a little heavier, but another longtime band that I'm going to guess a lot of people lost track of along the way, is Crocus. Of course, Crocus were riding high in the early 80s, with the success of, their Ballroom Blitz cover and all that. Did you know Crocus was still making albums as of 2010? And that's when this one came out, called Hoodoo. I had no idea. If you had asked me whatever became of Crocus, I don't even think I was aware they made it out of into the 1990s, much less, this far down the road. So yeah, so it's like, holy crap, no idea what to expect out of that. But playing it, it became apparent very quickly what they were going for here. It has a strong AC/DC vibe to it. And I know that comparison annoys some Crocus fans. That they don't like that parallel be driven, but I'm sorry. it's very much in that AC/DC, sort of 4/4, straightforward, hard rocking kind of sound, and they do it pretty well. This is clearly a band that's comfortable in their niche. From this, again, now I'm talking from one album. Like maybe this is an anomaly in the catalog, but it sounds like, based on what's being played here, they're comfortable in their own skin. They have a sound. They know what they want to put down, and they do it, and they do it quite well. So yeah, this is a solid little album. If you want something that's like AC/DC, but not AC/DC, yeah, here you go. Try this. The only problem I foresee with this in the future is when I'm in the mood for that style stuff, I'm not sure when I'm going to reach for this over one of the classic AC/DC albums. It's going to be like, will this come back off the shelf, or will I just go get Power Age or Dirty Deeds or something like that? I guess we'll find out. But I did think it was a pretty solid album. So cool to see that Crocus was still going strong even at that point. All right, up next we have the first solo album by Alex Massey. I want to say Massey. Maybe it was Masai, not sure. Everybody who's ever dug through used record boxes at a record show has come across some of the Massey albums on Metal Blade from the 80s. This was his first solo outing from 1989. It's got a great title, Attack of the Neon Shark. That's so 1980s, even though 89, but still slipped in there. Not a whole lot to say about this one. The first one is a decent hard rock sound with vocals. Most of the rest of the album is exactly what you'd expect. It's a guitar whiz kid doing guitar whiz kid things. If that's your jam, you might like this. If that bores you, you're not going to be interested in this. It's the kind of thing I don't mind hearing once to check it out. But yeah, those long, guitar solo albums, usually I revisit those kind of things very rarely. But it did give me a chance to, kind of figure out what the deal was with where the Alex Massey solo albums versus the band albums came out with, because I had no clue. And so at least gave me a chance to figure out their discography a little bit. All right. Next, I want to show two CDs at the same time because they kind of go together. It's two albums by Calibur. Now, Calibur, this band name, it is taken from an old new wave of British heavy metal compilation album that was called Calibur, and it had a lot of influential songs on it. It's become another one of those kind of mid-price, rarities. It's considered, one of the big compilations of the era. It's one I've never gotten a copy of, so I don't have one to show off. It had, in particular, I know some very early Satan, one or two tracks by them that are standouts on it. I've heard the compilation, I just don't own it. So that's what the band name is coming from, and what this is are some guys doing a lot of new wave of British heavy metal covers. It's just, sort of a tribute to the era. These came out in 2009 and 2011. One of the main guys behind this seems to be Nudie. Again, maybe I'm mispronouncing that, but he's probably better known as doing some of the drum work with Manila Road on some of their later albums. If you like new wave of British heavy metal, these are a fun listen. They pick a wide range of songs to cover. They pick some songs by very obvious, well-known bands like Tigers of Pantang and Raven, and they pick some really obscure stuff like JJ's Powerhouse. So it's a wide mix of songs. But again, they're all cover songs. It's fun for me as a longtime new wave of British heavy metal fan. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Sit down, let's see how many of these songs I can identify without looking at the CD while I played. I did pretty good. But it's also, some of them are pretty faithful copies. Some of them work a little better than others. If you were somebody curious about new wave of British heavy metal but had no idea where to start with stuff, if you just wanted to get a general feel for what some of the music can be like, you could certainly do worse than starting out with these. They're pretty extensive liner notes talking about some of the different bands and albums. So it also gives you, little historical perspective from some guys that were clearly big fans of that whole style and era of heavy metal. There's one track on one of these that was worth pointing out. Gotta find it now. Yeah, there's a track on one of these called Lift Up Your Eyes by Saxon. And if you don't recognize that Saxon song, it is apparently only originally a 1-minute song fragment. The song's on the track list there. It's on this one called Lords of the New Wave of British Heavy Metal. And this little Saxon song fragment ended up on some kind of bootleg compilation of Saxon demos and outtakes that had circulated at one point. And the band took that sample, talked to Biff and the people in Saxon, said, "Hey, would you mind if we took that and built it into a real song?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." We never did. And it's actually a pretty cool song. I liked it. I thought they did a really good job. It's very energetic, upbeat. It has a really cool ending where they keep revving up the speed a little faster and faster, very similar to Chateau's White Steel. So kind of just a neat little historical footnote that they took this little old, throwaway 1-minute sample of a Saxon song that never got built and made it into a song themselves. But yeah, beyond that, it's all cover material. This band, I don't know if they're still doing anything. I do remember around that time frame, 2010, 2011, they were on the bill for a lot of the big European festivals. So they got some notoriety and some exposure, on that kind of circuit. All right, just a few more to go. Next up, we have an album from Status Quo called Quo. This is one of those bands that often gets quoted from 70s hard rock and even sort of proto new wave of British heavy metal as someone that you should check out. And I never really had. I'd heard a song here and a song there. They were never really strong enough to make me think, all right, that one's going to the front of the two playlist and let's go check that out more. So it was like, hey, here's a good chance. Let's check this out. It's, again, I think I said it was an album from 1974. Looked around a little bit online for information about it. Some reviews were saying, yeah, this is like, one of their best and one of their possibly their heaviest album. It was like, okay, sounds like we got a winner here. Marty, whatever I did to you, I'm sorry and I apologize. This is not a good album. I do not like this. My issue with this album, and where some British hard rock bands in the 70s run astray for me, is they go a little bit too much into sort of like a barroom boogie kind of beat. And that's a sound that does not work well for me personally. If other folks like it, hey, that is absolutely cool. I never like it when bands stray in that formula. You hear it even in some very early new wave of British heavy metal acts that they're still drawing on, that sort of pub rock sound. The songs tend to have these little bouncy beats to them, and I just can't get into it at all. So, yeah, this was a big miss. A little disappointing because I thought it would be a good one to check out. But at least I know that I don't think Status Quo is the band for me to really delve into. So a miss, but I learned something from it. All right. Next up, we have a band called Strike Light, which I'd never heard of before, with an album called Taste My Attack. Now, I'm not making that up. That's not me goofing. Taste My Attack. So right away, you probably figuring these ain't local boys. This is another Greek band, actually. This one came out in 2011. All I can really say about this one is everything I said about the Dark Nightmare band earlier kind of applies to this one too. It's not a bad album. The songs are competent, but it just feels very much like paint by numbers, copy your influences, very standard issue generic heavy metal. Again, this is a band that just needs to inject some personality. They need to do a little bit of their own thing. The songs aren't bad. The musicianship's not bad. It's just feels very plain to me. So let's not dwell on that. Let's move on. Next one worked out pretty good. Another hard rock outing from Uriah Heap. Did you know Uriah Heap was still a going entity as late as 1998? I didn't know that. Did you know that Uriah Heap had made 20 studio albums by 1998? Nope, didn't know that either. Uriah Heap, again, I'm familiar with their early sort of classic stuff, but it's one of those bands where I've got the best of. I might still have a copy of Demons and Wizards or The Magician's Birthday somewhere around, but I might not. If I do, it's on the hard drive. I don't have hard copies of them anymore. But they have a good body of hits, classic songs from the 70s. I had no idea they were still up and running entity. And they still have a lot of the sort of long-running guys in here. I think Steve Kerslake is still playing drums on this one, if I remember right. I'd have to double check that. I might be off on that one. But anyway, this one is called Sonic Origami. Not the most promising title. The cover art, I'm not sure that's cover art so much as somebody just like spilled something or doodled something. I mean, for 1998, even Windows 95, you could have done better than that. So a little uncertain going into this. However, this turned out it's a very solid hard rock album. It's interesting. It came out the same year as the Deep Purple Abandoned CD I showed earlier. But whereas the Abandoned CD just felt like really disjointed, songs, every song just its own little style. One of them was like a half rap song, for goodness sake. The album had no direction, no cohesion. This is very lively. It's pretty energetic sounding. It's pretty tight. This is a band that is still enjoying what they're doing and doing it pretty well. Whereas, that Deep Purple Abandon album felt like this is a band just throwing anything at the wall and see what'll stick. So yeah, this one held together quite well. If I've got one issue with it, it's that it's like 13 songs long. It pushes, I think it pushes around the 75-minute mark. It definitely pushes around the hour mark. And every song is kind of at the same length, kind of the same pace. And so, after a while, it's easy to start tuning it out. But no, overall, this was a nice surprise. It's like, yeah, that's, again, not a bad album. Like the Kansas album, it's not something I'm going to listen to often, but when I'm in the mood for this style of stuff, Uriah Heap, weird origami title, or the Kansas Power album, yeah, those are things I'll look at the shelf and be like, I might take that back off now. So yeah, cool album. Enjoyed that one. All right, we're at the bottom of the stack with a band called Wraith. That's a cool band name. Album art, cool idea for an image, not necessarily the best art, and we're not talking Necrolord material here or anything. Album title here, Minions of Metal. This band made a couple of albums. They're a U.S. band. I think they were out of New York. This one came out in 2006. This one, even though it's not a Greek band, I want to have to file it a little bit close to the Strike Light and the Dark Nightmare. Nothing wrong with the musicianship, nothing wrong with the songwriting, but nothing stands out about it either. So I played this one a couple of times, and it's just like, okay, I get the idea. They're just going for that, very much Iron Maiden style heavy metal, but there's nothing else to make note of here. The one little footnote is the last song, they do a cover of Let the Blood Run Red by Thor, and actually features a vocal cameo by Thor. Thor's is sort of an interesting one. I had a couple of Thor albums back in the day, and everybody, 20 years ago thought that was, such a cheeseball sort of joke of a thing. I didn't mind it, but it wasn't the best thing I'd ever heard. At some point, the albums got traded away. And, lo and behold, years and years later, people are covering Thor songs and getting Thor to do guest vocals, and they treat it as, sort of like, up there with, Manowar and Heavy Load and stuff. It's just like, yeah, well, he got a new lease on life. Good for him, I guess. So yeah, Wraith, pretty average metal outing here. Not terrible, but there's nothing here I can say that if you really like something, check this out. Not necessarily. It's probably a band you can take a pass on unless you just really want to hear everything imaginable in that, tried and true, straightforward heavy metal sound. Okay, so we got through 18 CDs in about 40 minutes. Not too bad. So let's bring it to a close. Anything out of this stack catch your ear? Any of these bands in particular, like Deep Purple or Uriah Heap or Kansas, that had really long running discographies that a lot of people may not know in depth. Are there any hidden gems or highlights in there that people should pick out that, hey, this one Uriah Heap album from 1991 is so good, and it just got lost in the shuffle because people weren't paying attention to the band anymore? If you've got anything like that to share, please leave a comment down below, and let's keep talking metal there. So until next time, everybody, stay safe and keep banging your head.